You are speaking at the conference for everybody. The conference is April the 21st to the 23rd. Register now so you can hear Maia talk, and we have some other fantastic speakers as well. And you go to dogbehaviorconference.com to sign up. But you're speaking about, as you said, after the click, completing the training picture. So we're talking about really focusing not so much on what the dog is doing, obviously that's important, but what you're doing and how you can make what you do easier for the dog to understand and respond to.
Absolutely. And particularly, I want to focus on the C and the ABC. So if we have antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, if we have the leash walking environment, we have the dog walking on leash, and we want to reinforce leash behavior that we like in that example, I want to focus on that third piece, that consequence picture. It's not the only way that we can make training easier, but I really do think that that's the question. How can we make training easier? And for me, I think I've never changed a dog's behavior, not my own dog's behavior, not a client's dog's behavior. I have changed my behavior so that their behavior changes. I cannot control another being's behavior. So when I think about clients too, I think about what skills can I give them such that their dog's behavior aligns more with their goals. And a lot of those skills, I think, are reinforcement placement. And this is kind of a theoretical pitch for mechanics. And I know that mechanics aren't everyone's favorite topic in the world.
Now, I have to admit, they're not my favorite topic. I have to say, when we teach at VSA, and then, we have great faculty as well that teach, and they do the mechanics of it. And for me, that's like, it's vitally important. You have to know how to do it. It is the very foundation. You have to know. But I'm just such like, I just want to problem solve. I just want to do this and that. I don't really care about mechanics. But it is important. So sorry to interrupt you. But yes, it does kind of makes me feel like, when you talk about training mechanics.
Yes, okay. I know. And I think part of that is the way that we've taught mechanics. I'm guilty of this as well. I mean, how much fun is it to do a dress rehearsal of your training system without your animal there, right? But one of the things that I think about here is that when we do that, we are clearer for our animals and we are kinder to them too. I think one of the ways we've talked about mechanics that probably hasn't helped, and I'm hoping to go away from this, is to talk about mechanics in terms of being really precise and very speedy. For instance, having perfect timing, being really precise and very speedy. And those things can be valuable, but they aren't the only way to get a clean, clear reinforcement loop. This is something that I will say that this has been a meditation for me that is currently part of a conversation I'm having with the wonderful Mary Hunter, who teaches reinforcement systems classes. And I've learned a lot from her about thinking about speed and accuracy as maybe not the most important goals in reinforcement delivery. So just as a practical example, if we have a client who's struggling to feed fast enough, right? We've all heard, the rate of reinforcement, we have to keep that rate high. We have to keep that rate high. If we have a client who's struggling to get those treats out and get them to their dog fast enough and the dog is getting frustrated, can we give them a bigger, crunchier treat? If we give them a bigger, crunchier treat, now the client can reach, grab the treat, and the dog is eating for the next 5 to 10 seconds. While the client can reset and relax. So nobody's scrambling here anymore. That's the kind of thing that I think about when I think about reinforcement, are there ways to make it easier and really draw on the strengths of the team that you're working with for the behaviors that you want. So nobody's frustrated.
So let's take it. And when we're talking about reinforcement, we're talking about food here. And I do want to talk about toys in a minute, but focusing on food. So let's say, for example, there's many trainers that, myself included, that like to give ourselves a little space by throwing food in on the ground. So the dog goes to get the food. We can have a little bit of space, and then the dog comes back to us. We call it a reset, but actually it's not really a reset. It's just part of the flow. What do you think about that?
I think that's a very useful tool and an example of using reinforcement placement to set you both up again for the next rep. One thing that I think about, so if we think about that ABC, it sounds like behavior is only happening in B, right? The dog is doing the thing in B, but of course, behavior is happening in C too and in A. And I just want to focus on, well, what are you doing in C? That is a conversation too. Your animal does something, you do something. You throw the treats on the ground, your animal walks to the treats, you step back from the treats, you maybe put your hands back down in whatever their place is while you're waiting for your animal to reset himself. Those are all behaviors. And depending on what your target is, what you're trying to teach, what component skill you're trying to teach, a reset may be the right thing to do. There are other times where you might get a lot of searching behavior or snapping behavior out of this. For instance, with my cattle dog, if you toss treats, she's just going to grab them out of the air. She's fast. And if I didn't want to build a lot of mouth snapping into the behavior, I would not be tossing those treats, because whatever happens, those behaviors in C, they'll bleed back into B. They're part of that picture, part of that loop for the animal. So sometimes we find ourselves solving problems that we could have prevented just by thinking about where and how we plan to reinforce. The click doesn't end the behavior. The click is just the beginning of a new behavior sequence for the animal and for you too.
Yeah, I think that's really important to note that so for so long we've been saying, the click kind of marks when the end of that behavior, so that reinforcement comes, but it isn't. It's like a whole sequence, and there's so much happening, and including with you. I remember Patricia McConnell saying something very important. I don't know whether it was in her book, The Other End of the Leash, but she, and it really stuck with me. There are some things that these gurus, I just call them, they are, I fangirl, but she said that she really noticed when she was working with a dog that was fearful. I think this dog had shown some aggressive behavior. She said that even just the movement of her body, so even if she made a little move forward with her body, that was enough to scare that dog even more. So she realized that actually what she was doing by moving towards even just a fraction, not even moving her legs, that dog was watching her, and that caused a negative reaction. So actually just by standing up and just even leaning back a tiny bit, that was information, and it was so subtle, but it had such a profound effect on the dog.
Absolutely. And you're making me think about, so one of the other things that you get out of thinking hard about reinforcement is starting to notice what emotional behavior your unclear or small behaviors may be producing in your animal. If your dog doesn't know when or where or how reinforcement will come to them, they may start to show frantic behavior that looks frustrated, behavior that we label as anxious too. They're scanning the environment. And sometimes we misread that. We go, oh, that's an anxious dog. Look, he's an anxious dog. Oftentimes when we clean up the reinforcement system there, we see that those behaviors that we were putting in the dog, they were just really a reflection and a function of our messy reinforcement system. And we can get a question too.
So let's say that is happening, right? Your dog is scanning. Your dog is frustrated. Your dog, how can you change your reinforcement? What do you do?
So the first thing that I would think about is observation. There's a larger conversation that I want to have around reinforcement, and that's about the status of behavior. So what is behavior? What is it that we're doing when we're training? Why should we care about all these little details in training? And for me, the first thing that I think of for this is that whatever the animal is doing, it matters to her. And it matters to her in the sense that it has a function. It's rational for her. Given her learning history and her current experience, this is the behavior that she has to get what she needs or want, whatever that critical consequence is that matters to her. And so when I take it that way, and I just take it that way as an axiom, I will always treat the behavior of another as if it has a critical function for that individual. Then the first thing that I would want to know is, what are her alternatives here? What other skills does she have here to get to that, whatever that is that she is aiming for? So once we've determined the function, the next thing I would think about is teaching some other skills, assuming that those behaviors that we're talking about, that we're trying to modify, that they're costly. And what I mean by costly is they're uncomfortable for us, or they're uncomfortable for our dog, or both. Even behaviors that are costly, loud, scary, uncomfortable, they have a function too. And if we ask ourselves, what are the alternatives here? And we find that there are none for this animal, then that's when we train. And to me, that means changing my behavior in that scenario.
Now, can we pivot on to toys? I want to talk about toys. And now there's lots of people that come to me and say, my dog is not motivated by food. My dog won't take treats. And then I have to look at the environment and see, what kind of food they're using, what the environment that they're training in, because all dogs have to eat. We know that, right? Otherwise they don't live. So all dogs are actually motivated to have food, but it just might be that the environment's not set up. The treat is not exactly what they might like. And so we have to, change that up. But let's say truly, we cannot, for whatever reason, use food. What do you do then?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the ways in which a constructional approach, and I think of Jesus Rosales-Ruiz and Joe Lang here, both behavior analysts in this framework, can be really helpful. Because if the dog is behaving, then that is that they're doing something, then they're doing it for a critical consequence. And if that's not food, then identifying what that consequence is the first step toward giving them another way to reach that consequence. We often use food. I use food a ton in training because it's efficient and it's easy to control. But there are many times where we may not want to layer food on top of the contingencies that are already happening, even if the dog is willing to eat. So in separation anxiety work, for instance, I don't use a lot of food. I want to know, in this case, what is that dog's body language? Where is their tolerance level? What is their coping ability right now? And I don't want to muddy the waters by adding a bunch of food in there. That can make it really hard for me to see where they are in their current tolerance level of alone time. And same for that dog that's out there that says no thanks to food. I guess this is the Pony show, but I will just say that Pony didn't eat in training for the first year that I had him. He would not eat in training. And he actually struggled to eat enough calories outside of training as well. So but certainly if you had a treat pouch or if you offered him a treat in a training session, he might take it gently between his teeth, place it on the ground, and hightail out of there. He wouldn't eat it, and he wasn't interested in working for it at that moment. So the struggle is real, and I understand the frustration of being in that. But I would say that if you are working with an animal like that, instead of skipping to the tools that you know best, which for me, they're food, I would think about how can I deliver the consequence that's currently maintaining that behavior with a different skill.
I love that. Okay. If we can just focus on the food, we've talked about delivery, we've talked about the consequence, but there is obviously a debate in the dog training world that can get quite difficult at times. And there's a lot of people that say, well, I wouldn't say a lot of people, I would say probably less people now than there ever has been before, that tell people, trainers, I should say, that tell clients not to use food at all because food is bribery. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I hear that one fairly frequently still where I live. I have to say, in the southeastern United States, I still hear that. I just often will let people know. So there's some strategic stuff that I might say in this case as well. But I'll often just let people know that your dog is behaving for consequences. And if you are able to control those consequences, you can change their behavior. But if you cannot control those consequences, then that loop, that contingency loop, that behavior consequence loop, you're not a part of it. You're not relevant to it. The reason I use food is because it's easy for me, not because it's the thing that, or the only thing that reinforces behavior. If that were the case, then the only dogs that would have any behavior at all would be dogs that are being fed for those behaviors. And obviously, we get called into plenty of houses where there are many loud, big behaviors that animals are performing, and they've never had a reward for doing those things. So I often tell people, yeah, sure, we can do it without food, but you will have to develop a much more nuanced skill set in order to do that well without food. And in some cases, that may mean removing the animal from that environment if that consequence is something completely out of your control, like a squirrel, right? It may mean removing your animal from the environment for a long time before you're able to work back up to that environment. So I use food because it's easy, it's quick, it's clear, and it's a system that I can use to have conversations about building skills with my animals.
And I use food as well. I mean, I use toys. I use other skills as well. You know, my dogs know that if I just need them just to wait a little bit, I won't ask them to. I just know that. I mean, I'll say wait, but they know that they just have to gather themselves, and once they do, then the door opens and then they can go outside, right? So that's that life reward, as you say. So, but I do take umbrage at the fact of when people say that food is bribery, because I think it devalues the power of food. And I also like to make teaching fun. And as I said, it's easy as possible, easy for me, easy for clients, and easy for dogs. And so if there's some kind of like feel good thing at the end of it, well, then why not? I'd rather do that than use any kind of correction or punishment or corrective tool in order to get my dog to actually do something, to behave via coercion. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that kind of trainer, and I don't want to be that kind of person. Yeah. So, that's it's always an argument, and plus, I mean, we can't ignore what food does to brain chemistry as well. We can't ignore the fact when dog is in seeking mode and seeking behavior, the anticipation of that food, what that does inside the brain as well, and how that can increase motivation and reward-driven learning and actual coordination for the way the dog moves through the space, as well as the dog feeling good about it. So I think that food has been my friend for many, many years, as well as dogs. And, for social aspects as well, we socialize over food all the time. I like to socialize with my dogs over food as well.
Yeah. And I think the other part of that bribery conversation, the reason that people see food as potentially bribery is because they are seeing that you are delivering something for the animal behaving. But there's some confusion about how behavior happens. That there is no behavior that happens without reinforcement that's maintained anyway. It's always a function of reinforcement and punishment. So when we educate people about what behavior is, I think oftentimes their resistance to using obvious, clear consequences that are easy for them, easy for their dog, and that don't involve the emotional fallout that other consequences might, like harsh or coercive methods might have, really falls. So to me, it's also about understanding behavior. Your dog doesn't do anything because you want him to. He doesn't do anything just for the doing of it. He does it to change something in his environment. That's why he does it.
Isn't that all behavior? I mean, truly, when we're behaving in a certain way in front of somebody, aren't we trying to enhance or dissuade that person from doing that behavior? We're trying to change that person's behavior or maybe encourage that person to respond in the way that we want that person to respond. So we're doing that all the time.
Yes, we're always influencing behavior, and it doesn't have to be manipulative either. It doesn't mean that when I'm having this conversation with you, I'm trying to get you to say a particular thing. I'm interacting with you. Mm-hmm. And that is what the training conversation to me is. It's just a physical one. So we're doing this in verbal behavior, partly, right? But not only. But we with our animals, we have a physical, a kinesthetic conversation, a conversation that happens in movement. You do something and then I do something, and then you do something and then I do something. That's a conversation too. And we're always influencing each other's behavior. My dog's behavior, of course, changes mine, and vice versa.
I see training as a dance. You're both learning the steps. And when you first start, and I tell this again to clients because I'm like, it's okay if you mess up. And that's the beauty of positive reinforcement. If you mess up, it's not going to cause any real problem to the dog or to you. But when you're first starting, it's like a dance. You're going to have to learn the steps. And whilst you're learning, you might tread on each other's toes, but it's okay because one day it will become fluid. And then when you dance together, there's nothing better. Like your border collie. Now your border collie's out there, champion herder, but had to learn those steps, which, as you said yourself, can be hard at times. But now look where you are. The dance is working. And I'm sure it's beautiful. I'm sure it's poetry in motion when you watch.
Well, I think Victoria, about a metaphor from a sheepdog trainer, positive sheepdog trainer, who's really helped us, Barb Buchmeyer. She often talks about traditional training as sculpting and about positive training as ceramics or potting. And when we sculpt, what we do is we have the block of stone and we start cutting pieces off until we get the picture that we want. That's what punishment can do. We can lop off, suppress behavior, push behavior down. When we are doing positive reinforcement training, we are building behavior the way that a potter might build up a pot with molding that lump of clay. And one really nice thing about being a potter instead of a sculptor is if you lop some piece of that stone off and you want it back, it's gone. But with sculpting, when we make those mistakes, like we step on each other's toes or we find out, whoops, that isn't actually what I wanted to happen in this situation, that clay is malleable. We can rebuild it. We can go back a step. We can push it back up. So I think it's really, really friendly for trainers as well and forgiving for both ends of the leash.
Maia, it's been amazing to talk to you. I'm so excited for your presentation after the completing the training picture. She will be speaking at the conference. Guys, get your tickets, register April the 21st to the 23rd. You don't have to be there all 3 days live. Don't worry about it. You can come and attend and come in and out when you need. And also once you register and the presentations go out live, then you have one whole year to watch those presentations. So you can register at dogbehaviorconference.com. Maia, thank you so much for talking with me. I could talk to you forever, and I'm so glad you're part of VSA and Positively.
Same. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.